Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. 6 years ago, the Kingstonian sat down with Mark Gerretsen and his dad, John, chatting about their mutual experiences as politicians at different levels of government. John was mayor of this city and a member of the provincial legislature. Mark spent time as mayor as well and now sits as the representative for this area in the federal parliament in Ottawa. In a later episode, I followed up with John, and now it's Mark's turn. I sat down with him in mid-November of 2023 to talk about his passion for politics in a non-partisan way and learn a little bit more about the duties and responsibilities of an MP. Here is our conversation. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
I guess this is welcome back because back in the days when the Kingstonian was just a radio show, and this goes back 7 years, almost exactly 7 years, you and your dad came on the show and did a program together, which was kind of fun. And speaking of dad, I guess we should tell those folks who may not be aware, who may not live in Kingston, that your dad is John Gerretsen, who spent 16 years on city council and 8 of them as mayor. And he was also a member of the provincial legislature for about 19 years. So my first question is, what was it about his journey that got you interested in politics?
Well, if there was anything about his journey that got me interested in it, I didn't realize it till I was much older. I always tell people that the two people that were the most surprised when I said I wanted to run for city council were both my parents. I don't think they wouldn't have been able to predict it. But I mean, I was certainly exposed throughout my life to what politics was about, and how it impacted people both positively and negatively. And whether I really appreciated it at the time, I think it was more subconscious. But it was later in my late 20s and right around, maybe around when I was turning 30, around that time, that I started to have a lot of conversations with people who were involved with various different things going on in our community. At the time, it was the building of the LVEC, the Large Venue Entertainment Center in downtown Kingston. And as you might recall, there was a lot of controversy over that. And we just started to have these debates over what was right for the city and what wasn't. And then finally, one day I said, you know what, I think I'm going to run for city council. And that's how it kind of started. And both my parents were really surprised by it. Although the vast majority of folks out there think I just got involved in politics because my father was, and I can totally understand that. Certainly was a huge influence, but it was really those one-on-one conversations with friends and colleagues about, how to make our community better.
We'll get back to that debate thing a bit later on, but when you decided to run for city council, this would be the 2006-2010 term. Mm-hmm. So when you were thinking about running, what were the issues that you were passionate about as you contemplated that first run?
The building of the Large Venue Entertainment Center in downtown Kingston, which, I mean, it's hard to argue that was the best place for it to be built. However, at the time, there was a lot of discussion about, well, why don't we look at how other cities have done it? A lot of other cities have put these venues in the suburbs or out by the highway. And there was a lot of back and forth on this. And that was one of them. The other one was KEDCO. KEDCO is a Kingston Economic Development Corporation, was going through a lot of turmoil at the time, and there was a lot of public opinion generated on that. So that was another thing that I can remember talking about. And I can also remember the environment. One of the reasons why I got involved in politics, I'll never forget, I remember sitting on a patio in Ottawa with a friend of mine, and it was 2006, 2005-ish, and we were talking about the impact on the environment was going to have on our world, and in particular Canada. And it was just something, that I just felt like something needs to be done about. And I think those were, some of the other conversations that I was having was on that topic.
You spent 4 years as a councilor, and then you decided to run for mayor in 2010. When you put on that chain of office in your first few days as mayor, what was your intent in terms of things you were going to focus on at that particular point?
Well, at the time, we had just experienced a lot of high property taxes in Kingston from around 2000 to 2007, 2008. The city of Kingston, through the leadership of Harvey Rosen, who did incredible things at the time in terms of having the insight into in terms of what needed to be done, realized that we had Harvey Rosen realized we had aging infrastructure that needed to be addressed, and that we weren't collecting enough taxes for it. We were basically only collecting enough taxes at the time in order to pay for the expenses, but not rehabilitation of any infrastructure. And so he led the charge with city council to raise taxes, but they had been raised pretty high. Some years it was 8 and 9%, if not higher. And so when I first got into office, one of my objectives was, okay, we've had this period of increased taxes. We've now been able to start building up our reserve funds. We now have a hold on what the future looks like in terms of our ability to rebuild. Now we have to rein that in. And so we were able to do that by with the target of keeping our property tax increases to that of inflation. And so we were quite successful of it at the time. And then there were some other things in terms of trying to bring council together. Council had been quite divided, and things had been quite controversial over the preceding years, and that was another objective of mine. So early on, I it's funny, just the other day I was going through a notebook, and I found a notebook on every single city councilor, the 12 councilors that were elected when I was elected mayor. I had sat down with them to get their priorities, to understand where the commonalities were with each other and where the differences were. And so it was about that kind of like building a team, kind of so to speak. And sometimes we can disagree, but providing that we can do it with a certain degree of empathy and a certain degree of understanding, I think is most important. And we kind of started to get to that place, in my opinion.
So when you finished up your term as mayor, when you look back on those 4 years, anything stick out as in terms of accomplishments? Did you formulate that team that you were talking about?
That proved to be, if I'm being completely honest, I think that proved to be a little harder than I thought. There were certainly challenging moments, but at the end of the day, I think when we look back on the 4 years, we did good things for the city of Kingston. We encouraged and pushed forward in terms of intensification in the city, increasing density. We worked on a number of big non-sexy infrastructure projects, like the Big Dig in downtown Kingston, of getting ready to replace the underground services along Princess Street. We purchased a lot of the land and made the plans for the third crossing, and started to work with other levels of government, which I got to participate in federally later on, to securing that funding. And of course, the one thing that I mentioned at the beginning that we were seeking to do was to keep those property tax rates down. And we were able to successfully do that over the 4-year period. And to their credit, ever since then, with Mayor Patterson, they've pretty much been able to hold that as well. So I think that when we look back, we looked back on it as though we were a city council that was able to accomplish a number of really, really important things that the city needed at the time.
Let's move ahead to 2015. And an opportunity comes up when the sitting member of parliament in Ottawa for Kingston and the Islands, Ted Hsu, decided that he was not going to run again for the 2015 election. So you jump into the fray. But the first step in the process, for those people listening who may not be aware of the process, is that you have to get the nomination for your party to be able to run in the election. And I'd like to take a minute and sort of digress a little bit and have you talk a little bit about the importance of the party in general terms, like a political party, in terms of helping a candidate get a nomination, and the importance of the volunteers that seem to come out of the woodwork when you really need them.
It's an excellent question, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is that within your political party, you go through this nomination process of becoming the candidate. And as you indicated, Ted Hsu, who had been the previous member of Parliament, I mean, he was set to run again in 2004, the summer of 2014. I actually remember signing his nomination paper when he was collecting signatures, and then suddenly, and to the shock of many. I'll never forget, it was in the middle of August of 2014. There was an announcement, I think I heard it on the radio, that Ted Hsu had decided he wasn't going to run again. And I was really surprised, given that he had been lining up to do that. But then suddenly I was confronted with, well, we were just heading towards the 2014 municipal election. And I thought, well, do I run again for mayor? Because that's what I had intended on doing. Or do I try something else where I think I can help out and contribute in another way? And ultimately, I decided I would go through that. I would attempt to run federally. So first, I was confronted with our nomination, and it was myself and four other excellent individuals who had put their names forward. The party was very clear about it. They said, we're not endorsing one candidate or the other. It's an open nomination. Go out, engage people, sign people up, get people to vote for you, do everything you need to do, and may the best person win, kind of thing. And so I did that. I can still remember Halloween of 2014, sitting and calling people, and I knew they'd be home because they'd be sitting waiting to hand out candy, and I would call them up and I'd say, it's Mark Gerretsen calling. I'm running for the nomination. Can I count on your support? Do you have any questions for me? And I would talk to engaging with people. And I think, and it's funny because a number of the volunteers that you talk about that kind of come forward are people that I made phone calls to back in 2014. One individual who was 17 years old at the time, he actually turned 18 on election day in October of 2015. So he got to vote on his 18th birthday. Later went away to school, but then came back and now works for me in Ottawa. And he says the reason why he voted for me and helped me in the 2015 nomination was because he was an identified liberal on the list, and I happened to call him, and he answered the phone, and we had a chat about it. And the reality is I was calling so many people at the time that I don't even remember talking to him. But the point is that that's how you engage. Like, it's in a nomination process is one-on-one conversations with people. You can't rely on social media to do the work for you. You gotta talk to people individually. And so through that process, I was very fortunate to become the candidate. And within the Liberal Party, we have a ranked ballot. So basically you rank your choices. And so it creates for a different environment in terms of the actual election process, because it's not you against everybody else. It's you and then trying to find commonalities with the other candidates, because you're hoping that their supporters will put you down as the number 2 choice. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially the process. And I was very fortunate enough to have been selected, and then obviously ran in the subsequent election in 2015.
How does it differ between the business of contacting people to get the nomination and then contacting people to get their vote in the actual election? Because you're not talking to the same crowd.
You're not. So once you get elected and you are then elected in the nomination and you become the candidate, up to that point, you're only talking to people who already agree with you. And they're part of your political party for the most part. Values align because you're all liberals. After that point, you're now, as the candidate, out into a general election where now you're interacting with everybody. You're interacting with those that support other political parties. You're interacting with those that might disagree completely with your stance on something. And that was it's a different beast, so to speak. The engagement is different. It's not always happy people that you're engaging with, or people that agree with you. And so your messaging is definitely different. You're now not just selling yourself as you are in a nomination process. You're also selling in my case, the Liberal brand, or whatever political party one might belong to. And so it certainly is different. It's a lot more cold calling. It's a lot more engagement in debates with people who disagree. It's not necessarily about the how, but becomes more about the why. In the debates between political parties, you're debating why more often, and when it's within a political party, it's more how. And so it changes definitely the manner of engagement, and because it depends on convincing people that your set of values that surround your party are better than the alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Sidebar conversation with respect to turnout.
Yeah.
It's always a topic that comes out for people who do actually go out and vote on a regular basis. It's very frustrating when you hear the numbers after the election as to how many people bothered to go out and vote. So as someone who has participated at the municipal level and at the federal level, and you have the experience of watching your dad at the provincial level, this business of turnout, any opinions on how you get people to turn out in bigger numbers to express their opinions?
It's a great question. I always hear the excuse from people, well, I didn't vote because I don't feel as though my vote counts, or I feel as though nobody represents my needs. I think the most important thing is that people vote. And there's a way to express your dissatisfaction with all the parties, and that's to spoil your ballot. But at least you've picked up your ballot. You've picked up the ballot, and you're consciously making an effort saying, I don't support any of these candidates, so I spoil my ballot. Now, that to a lot of people, that sounds like, well, that's just a waste of time. Why would you do that? At the end of the day, I think that it's the turnout, you still contribute to the turnout when you do that. You're still making a point when you do that. But I also think, to the larger question that you're asking of how do you encourage people who don't even do that to get out, it's really important that people recognize that the democratic process is based on the collective. And when we focus too much on the individual, we can lose sight of the collective. And the collective only works when the individual exercises their responsibility. And so when you ask the question of how do you get more people involved, well, I think for starters, people have to understand and appreciate why their individual participation is so important to that collective. And then once you conquer that, then you got to make sure that you can find the candidate or party that best represents your particular view and your particular interest in something. Now, listen, you will never find a party, a political organization that you 100% agree with. I don't 100% agree with everything and every position that the Liberal Party takes. And from time to time, I'll even voice that through my vote in Parliament. On various different issues. And it's happened over the last 8 years. I've probably voted against the consensus of the Liberal Party on at least a dozen times. But you have to appreciate that the reason why the Westminster parliamentary system has these parties is not because you're going to agree completely with everything that one party stands for, but rather that you see and recognize that your common values are best represented within one party or another. And so people have to find that place, and they have to find where they best fit. And I think that happens through education and engagement. And it's unfortunate, but you see this through you see this through Western democracies throughout the world, of the participation getting lower and lower. Having said that, the participation in our particular riding in Kingston and the Islands is one of, I believe, the more healthier ones in the country. And I think that's because we have a large public sector force here that understand perhaps a little bit better the importance of voting. So we do tend to be at at the higher end of participation at any given election.
So you walk into the House of Commons for the first time. Most important issue in your head that you want to address when you walk into the House?
Two things I had been elected on and that I was fighting for, and that stemmed from my time as mayor, was one, reopening the prison farms. We have a lot of prisons in the area surrounding Kingston, six in the, within 40 or 50 kilometers of Kingston. And we know that at the time that this issue was really important for Kingstonians and people in the area. And the second was getting funding for building the third crossing of the Cataraqui River, which is now the Waban crossing, which has been built. Those were the two most important things. And I can vividly remember my first two meetings, the first with Ralph Goodale, who is no longer in the House of Commons. He was defeated in the 2019 election. He was the Minister of Public Safety, which oversaw Corrections Canada. And we worked together to reopen. And then Amarjeet Sohi, who was the Minister of Infrastructure at the time, who was also defeated in 2019, but is now the mayor of Edmonton. He was the Minister of Infrastructure at the time, and I can remember several meetings with him of sitting down to talk about, this project, a new bridge, and the city of Kingston really needed a third of the funding from the federal government. And eventually everything kind of aligned and it worked out.
One of the things that I'm interested in with respect to an MP when they first show up in the House of Commons. So you come from a background that could be municipal or provincial politics, or maybe just business or whatever, but you get into the House of Commons and you have a list of things that you want to accomplish to help your riding. The thing that I'm curious about is that you are part of that collective that we talked about before inside your particular party. And if your party is on the government side of the House of Commons, you also have to make yourself aware of all the other issues that are happening in the country and internationally. And how does one go about doing that for the first time, and how long does it take?
Well, it takes a very long time. I would say that for me, I shouldn't say that. It takes varying degrees of time for different people. I'm the kind of person that gets there and through trial and error kind of stumbles around until I find my comfortable place. And I would say that took me about 3 years, if I'm being completely honest, by the time that I was comfortable and I started to understand and had a decent grasp on the issues. At the beginning, I was on the Standing Committee for the Environment and the Standing Committee for National Defense. And those would have been the two areas that I learned the most about the quickest. But as time went on and I started to participate in more debates in the House of Commons, I started to get a better grasp of all of those issues that are around that the country serves. And I think that one of the things that was that opened my eyes the most to the diversity of our country is the diversity of interests throughout our country. I remember my seatmate at the time when I was first elected was from Kelowna, BC. And what mattered to Kelowna versus what mattered to Eastern Ontario was almost night and day. Like they were just the issues were completely different. And so I really got a much better understanding. I've since become friends with a number of MPs from Atlantic Canada. And again, what matters to Atlantic Canada is quite often different than what matters to Southeastern Ontario. But you get this understanding and you get an appreciation of what is key throughout the country. And it was through conversations and through these various different debates that I really started to get a much better handle on it. And, just going back to one other thing you said, Dave, which is that, I was part of the governing party when I went in there, and indeed I was. And that certainly helped me to advance the issues for my riding, but it doesn't mean that you can't if you're not a member of the governing party. And a perfect example of that is Ted Hsu, who was the member before me. Ted was in opposition at the time. The Liberals were a small party of only 34, 35 members at the time, but Ted had the ability to walk across the aisle and talk to the Conservative ministers at the time and actually get things done for Kingston. So you don't have to be in the governing party to be an effective representative for local issues. And Ted is a perfect example of that.
You alluded to the discussion that you had when you first got there about the third crossing. So the third crossing, as you mentioned, is a bridge that takes people from one end of the city to the other. There are two other crossings. One is a major highway, and the other is a bridge that sometimes gets clogged with for all kinds of different reasons, but sometimes it's not an effective way to get across town. So this third crossing has been on the front pages of the local paper for years and years trying to get the money. So I'm curious to know how an MP for the riding can sit down and talk to the Minister of Infrastructure and get the money that you were able to get from the federal government to complete the project. How the process of you actually getting the money.
Yeah. Okay. So for starters, it's not the third crossing. It's actually the fourth crossing. I don't know why we called it the third crossing. There's Kingston Mills as well, which is another crossing. I don't know if third meant that we excluded the 401 originally, or that we never thought of Kingston Mills, but the third crossing is actually the fourth crossing. But in anyways, that's just a interesting point to observe. In terms of how you do that, listen, I have to pay credit where credit is due, and the reality is that the city of Kingston talked about the third crossing for decades, and it went back and forth, and before you could even go to the federal or provincial governments and say we want money, or we need money to help with this, you needed the city of Kingston to prioritize this as a priority of the city, and to start getting to the point where you could go and start to sit down with the other levels of government. And where credit is due is that the city councilor that was there, that I was on council with between 2006 and 2010, was Leonore Foster, who was the city councilor for Pittsburgh, and this was her passion. She successfully convinced a majority of council why we needed to do the environmental assessment of the third crossing, which was the first step. She successfully convinced city council why we needed to start buying the land on both sides of the crossing. It was really her initiative that took us from the dream to the reality. And once we were at the reality and we had done these studies and we had prepared it, then the next stage, quite honestly, is a lot easier, because then when I sit down, I can sit down and say, look, we've been talking about this for decades. We're at the point where we're ready to roll with it. You know, we've figured out the costing of it. This is going to cost the federal government approximately $60 million. The municipality will put in the same. We're going to ask the province for the same. And it develops the package a lot better, and you could sell it a lot easier. So, it wasn't it wasn't me being there and being on the governing side that was really the catalyst of making this happen. It was the fact that the city had put together a solid plan and was ready to start advocating. And yes, I was involved in putting together that plan during my time on city council, but it was really Councillor Leonore Foster who was the ringleader behind that, and rightly, in my opinion, deserves the credit for getting us there.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about debating. We mentioned the word a little while ago, and I'm curious to know, we all know that the House of Commons is a place where, and I'm simply simplifying this, is where laws are developed and discussed and eventually passed, and all basically designed to make the country a better place to live in. So the process of debating, is that something you enjoy doing?
Very much so. And it's something that I've come to enjoy doing over the last few years. I mean, it's why I think I was asked to be a parliamentary secretary to our government house leader, and then why in this since the cabinet shuffle in the summer, I was asked to be the deputy house leader, because it's clear, I think, to anybody who's in the House of Commons, whether you're on my side or not, that I enjoy being in there, and I enjoy speaking in the House, and I enjoy asking questions in the House, and I enjoy pushing for the values that I believe the majority of Kingstonians want to see in their representative. And doing so, it has become a passion of mine. I wouldn't say that it was when I got there. I was still learning and trying to figure out my way, but it's become a passion of mine. It's become, I believe, one of my strengths, and that's how I've been able to utilize that for the betterment of the team. That's not to say that, debating in the House is more important than committee work. I have colleagues that are incredible at committee. I have colleagues that are incredible at studying issues and being able to put forward objectives based on that incredible work. So, being in the House of Commons, and in particular within your political party, really is a team work. There are certain people that are good at certain things. And I think that at least right now, I've found my place where I can contribute the most in the House of Commons debating. So I certainly do enjoy that.
What does the deputy leader in the House do? Like, what would your duties be?
That's an excellent question. So the leader, the government leader in the House of Commons is the person that's responsible, the ministry that's responsible for ushering through legislation through the House of Commons. So deciding what we will debate on what day, deciding how much time we should allocate to each particular bill, working with the other House leaders from the other political parties to say, how much time do we need to debate on this? Have we debated this enough? Can we now send it to committee? When will we be done with this so we can send it over to the Senate? Quite literally, just working on how things are processed through the House, also leading the debates on issues. So getting up and being available to speak to various different issues. So the deputy, who's my case, is I'm the deputy to Karina Gould, who is the House leader, and we work together, in the House of Commons and on the premise of West Block, where the chamber is located, to work with other political parties, as well as to lead debates in the House of Commons to see legislation get through. Because I can appreciate the fact that the average Canadian probably doesn't understand the lengthy process that it takes to go from an idea to a law, but it is certainly, very there's very intensive. There's a lot that goes into it. There are a lot of steps through in the House of Commons and committee before it then goes to the Senate and does the same thing there. And this is all designed this way. Our Westminster parliamentary system is designed this way to make sure that you can't just have a law that is created on a whim and imposed upon people, but that instead laws go through several steps of deliberation to ensure that if there are flaws in them, the opportunity for those flaws have continuous, or improvements have continuous opportunities to be brought forward. And so as a deputy, I assist the House leader with that process through the House of Commons.
The riding that you represent, for those people living outside Kingston, is about 2 hours away from where all the action is in Ottawa. Now, I gather you spend some of your time there in Ottawa and you spend some of your time in your constituency. What's the breakdown of how much time you spend here versus there? And what do you do in either place?
Yeah, okay, excellent question. So I'd say it's roughly 26 of 52 weeks of the year the House of Commons sits. And so a typical sitting week is Monday to Friday, unless there happens to be a special occasion or a holiday where that doesn't line up. So quite often, so I'm on a 1 week constituency week right now. So right now the House of Commons isn't sitting right now. So I'm back in Kingston. But then after this week, we sit for 4 weeks in a row. I'm very fortunate because I do only live 2 hours away. I can go up on Monday morning and then come back Friday afternoon, which is what I typically do. The difference when I'm in Ottawa, everything is, unless I'm, advocating for something that's local, I'm using what I've collected when I'm in my riding by engaging with constituents. And that engagement can be formal, as in someone comes to see me in my office, but it can also be informal, where I'm in Costco and somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this." And trust me, that happens a lot. And then I take that and I use what I'm building in terms of how I feel I can best represent my constituents when I get back to Ottawa. And so when I'm in Ottawa, it's like 7:30 in the morning until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, kind of like days. So it's busy, and it's with work and like committee work and in the House of Commons and various different stakeholders that want to meet. And then when I'm back in the riding, it's a little bit more in terms of by appointment. Somebody will schedule something with me, and certainly less more informal.
How big a staff does an MP have, aside from a cabinet person?
So a typical MP's office, well, we're given a budget, and that budget can include lots of things from advertising to rental of constituency office space. Some people that have larger ridings geographically that might need to have two offices will have a slightly larger budget. And then it's up to our discretion on how we utilize the budget, including the staffing component. Some people, choose to have, two or three staff in Ottawa and 2 or 3 staff back in the riding. Other people, like myself, put more of the staff in the riding. I have one person in Ottawa, and then I have 4 full-time, four full-time in Kingston. And then in the summer we employ some Queen students that will do like an internship where they're paid and they work varying numbers of hours per week. So I'd say I have about in total, when you consider part-time employees, probably about 7 employees.
Mm-hmm. If you didn't have this passion for politics, what other career do you think you might have taken on?
A lot of people, if you're looking for me in Kingston, you should head to Home Depot, because you'll quite often find me. I am a really handy person that likes to build things. I like to renovate things. I renovate my own home in every house that I've lived in. I have a passion for building, and had I not gotten into politics when I did, I probably would have got into more of the construction and contracting world. And who knows, maybe one day I still will. And
you're looking for all those new tools that are on the shelves in Home Depot.
And they're so addictive. I can find a reason to buy any of them, put it that way, even though I probably don't need them.
Now, I think a lot of people know it's not easy being a politician. It's not easy on the family as well. And so I want to thank you for your service and thank your family as well. And thanks for the time today.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you, Dave.
My guest in this episode was Mark Gerretsen, the Member of Parliament in Ottawa for Kingston and the Islands. His contact information can be found in the liner notes. For those of you who have taken the time to listen, thank you, and I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.